it, and there's just been a lot going on. And I guess some of you would have seen my little video that I sent out half-heartedly, sort of deciding, I could cancel the whole thing, but the truth is, I, of course, don't want to do that. And I think sometimes these, like, when life just comes battering at you, I think that there is something really, really valuable about just sitting with it and talking about it and expressing it. And so I decided that this I don't know, the feeling of like what happens when it all gets hard. And not that any of us here, none of, I don't think any of you nor many of the people that I talk to expect that life shouldn't be hard. Nobody's expecting a super easy ride through the whole thing. But I do think that there's a difficulty in kind of s- like targeting and identifying what that line between like what we're willing to talk to, like the things that we've decided it's okay to talk about, like it's okay to talk about heartbreak and sadness, and it's okay to talk about bad luck, and there's all these things that it's okay to talk about. And then there's these other things that sit, of course, in the world of shame that are a lot harder to talk about. And so in my thinking, as I was putting together what will bring value here, and this sense of failure, like what about when you're failing? And I don't necessarily mean the kind of failure we think about in terms of like, not meeting our business goals or blah blah blah, all those other things. I mean, like, whatever your thing is, like we all experience an expectation of ourselves, and I don't know, maybe daily, if not daily, almost daily. We all have moments when we let ourselves down, right? When we haven't met the expectation that we hold ourselves to. And I think that this is tremendously healthy, right? It's a very healthy way to live, to kind of keep a high standard for yourself. But we're not very good, I think, and I'm speaking, sort of universally here, but we're not especially good at articulating what that's like and what we do with it. And some of us even have really, really good strategies of dealing with failure. And I'm using that word right now really broadly, and we'll get into that with our NLP lens in a second. But some of us are actually really, really good at dealing with failure, and we may sort of take it for granted, and we don't even realize that we have this really great gift at dealing with failure really well, and then all the misconceptions of that. So with that big convoluted opening, um, I offered you this idea of failure and profit, and the reason I said profit was because of our unique field. I think it is very different. Like I said in that video, all of us, nobody likes to fail, right? There are very few human beings that enjoy the feeling of failing. But I think because of this business that we're in, because all of us who are coaches or practitioners of any kind, we've done something really courageous in kind of putting ourselves out there and saying, I think I can help you with your human experience. Like, that's a bold thing to do, right? Like, all of us just barely got here. Kurt Vonnegut is my favorite author on the planet, and he has this piece that he says often when he speaks, and he says, his grandkids will look at him and say, like, my gosh, the world is such a mess. Like, what should I do about this? What should I do about that? And he'll look at them and say, well, I don't know. I just got here too. Like, and there is this sense of like, we are all really, really, you know, we're really unequipped in so many ways. And we're all having this experience together. And the fact that we ourselves have put ourselves out there to say, okay, we're willing to help you with who you are, not just like the way that you behave or your finances or your achievements external to you and all that kind of stuff, but like we're going to help you with being a better person or being more aligned or whatever the things that we say. And I think that brings a different relationship to ourselves when we feel like we're a mess, right? When we feel like we have when we're not the model that we'd like to be for ourselves, even if nobody knows it, or even if our clients don't know it necessarily. I think we have that whole imposter syndrome stuff going around. And so when I thought about profit, what I meant was, I know for sure, so many of my clients who are struggling with success, It's because of their inability to deal with failure. And I break it down to two things that we'll talk about. One is that there is an overemphasis on what failure even is. So it's just sort of not well defined. And so people think they fail a whole lot more than they actually do. And then the fact that they don't know how to deal with it. And so because of that, they end up, sort of locked in shame. And of course, we all know how that unfolds. And I think a lot of people are really selling themselves short and probably losing out, therefore, on a lot of profit, like a lot of, well-earned money. When we look at, people who are paid for their skill, they mess up all the time. Right? I mean, a baseball player strikes out as much as he hits the ball, I think more. There are people that do. We have examples. We could go on and on and on and on about the examples of people who make mistakes, and it doesn't, they don't feel like they're supposed to reduce their value because of it. And a lot of people do in all those other professions as well, but it definitely, I think it has a different type of stake for us. So I also mentioned success and integrity because I think integrity is so important to have in this conversation of failure. I think one really should never be spoken about without the other. And success, I just am going to just bring it in a tiny little bit because it's a bit of a false construct, right? The word success is starting to get under my skin a little as a coach. I don't know if this is just this particular, I don't know, time in my life or the world or whatever, but it just feels like it's really, what is success? Like success, I think is overused. And I think it's really a little bit of a unicorn. Like it's an idea that success is directly correlated to happiness. And I think that is a big, giant mistake that maybe as coaches, as practitioners who are helping others, would be worth just kind of looking at, is there a better way that we could use our own language to not accidentally continue to hold up this false idea that if you meet your achievements, that if you can identify as successful as opposed to a failure, like if you can call yourself a success or call yourself a failure, like that duality, if we as coaches could get away from that, I think we would be serving our clients a whole lot better. So that's where I'm going tonight. So I want to start out with this definition of failure. So I, of course, went to all of my many different sources and started just looking at who says what about failure, right? So all the people that I most admire, they all have, specific definitions of failure. And it is a very, because it's abstract, right? It doesn't actually have meaning. No, you can't be a failure without the company of others, right? No human being in isolation can fail at anything ever, even dying, because eventually they'll just die. And it won't, but if there's nobody to compare yourself to, you cannot fail, right? So it's a construct. And many things are constructs, and we live constructs, and there's nothing wrong with it just because it is a construct. But it's important to remember that it is this very, very, very subjective thing that we make up about ourselves or others purely based on comparison, right? Comparison creates expectation, and unmet expectation creates failure. So that's the first thing, is to just pay attention to anyone that uses the word failure as if it is concrete and universal and objective. They've made a mistake right there, right? So it is one to look out for when your clients are talking about things. You may want to pause if they say to you, I'm coming to you because I want to be more successful in my career. I've just had so many failures. I blah, blah, blah. And if it's not framed in a way where they're already sort of learning from it and taking positive things from it, you probably want to make sure you understand what your client actually means when they say that they have failed. It is definitely a place where I would pause and just ask questions about what that means to them, because it may give you a surprising amount of information just from that. So what I finally decided was most relevant to us, to me, to the work that we do, to the lens that we use, and basically just kind of what I wanted to talk about tonight, was one sort of single definition, which is, I think the things that are actually okay to call failures in a way are the things that we genuinely regret. If you can't regret it, then it can't be a failure. So let me explain. So regrettable things are, again, we have I think even a misunderstanding of this word, but regrettable things, when you look back on them, you have to have had some kind of control, right? So it would not make sense for somebody to say, I regret that my house burned down, assuming you weren't there and you didn't burn it down yourself. Right? You might say, I regret leaving the candle burning, but you're not, it just doesn't make sense, right? If somebody said, I regret my house burning down, you would right away be like, wait a minute, that doesn't fit, right? Like that doesn't fit. Doesn't make sense. You can be very sad that your house burned down. You could be, 100 other things, but you can't regret it. And I think it's really important to get this understanding of, we often say things that are regretful, like we put regret around them, something like, I regret that I didn't win this race, which is totally false. You can't regret not winning the race. What you can regret, of course, is like, I regret going to that party instead of going to bed early so that I was in my best shape. That's regrettable. That makes sense, right? But regretting not winning, if you did everything in your power, if you practiced and you dedicated yourself and you committed yourself and you put, your best effort forward, and then you got second in the race, you can't regret that. And therefore, you can't fail. Now hold on for a second to that. You can't, if the question was, did you fail at winning? No, you didn't fail at winning because you legitimately did everything that you could. Did you fail at going to bed the night before and being prepared for the race? Sure. But you can't fail at winning because you don't have the pieces required to have not failed. You can't have the opposite of it. You can't have won just based on something that you didn't have control over. So I know I'm being confusing right now, but just hang with me for a second. So can you control winning? No, actually, you can't. You can't control if some other person has thighs twice the size of yours and runs faster. That is outside of your control. So you cannot control winning. Can you control what time you go to bed? Yeah, 100%. You can control that. So in terms of how you would look back and decide, like, is it appropriate to have feelings of failure around not winning? No. Is it appropriate to have feelings of failure around choosing to go to the party instead of coming home? Sure, if you have a good strategy for failure. Because what the good kind of failure does is it teaches us something, right? And normally what we're going to experience is a sense of, you might end up with a sense of like guilt or shame, hopefully not shame, but guilt. And if you pair that with empathy or self-compassion, then it's a powerhouse. It's an absolute powerhouse. If you don't actually go to this place of, failure, meaning what I failed to do was align my behavior with my values. My values were, this race was really, really important to me. And I failed to make my behavior the night before, when there was this option to either go to bed or go to the party. I failed to align my values in a way where I ended up putting myself in the best position to win. So that kind of like a feeling of guilt or letting yourself down or whatever that is around your values, as long as you have empathy and self-compassion with that, like, okay, man, I missed this one, and I maybe could have won this one if I had done things differently. That can get the fire going. That can actually inspire really big change. That can set you up to be able to be a more fulfilled person. But if you don't have those two pieces, if you don't have some sense of regret in combination with self-compassion and empathy, if you have kind of any other recipe, it's not going to turn out very well. But those two pieces are the necessary pieces to actually have like a really, really successful failure. And I would argue that's the only real failure, because anything else is not actually fitting what failure is. So I'm gonna just leave that there for a second, and we'll come back to it, and of course we'll pin this all together. But there's a couple of there's four things that have to happen in order for you to actually fail. So again, when you're working with clients, I think sort of sorting out this sense of like, I'm sorry, what did you actually fail at? Because if you failed at getting 10 clients to sign up this week, which was your goal or whatever, that is a big bunch of, nothing. You can't work with that. There's nothing to work with, right? So you just sort of backtrack until you get to like, what is it that's regrettable? You can't possibly regret not having signed up 10 clients. But what piece of that can you actually find a regrettable action? Here's the cool part. If the person is aligned in their values, they're not going to find any. They're not going to find regrettable actions. They may find like experiments. They may say, you know what, I really thought it'd be a great idea to hire this person and to make a couple of videos, and the videos actually fell flat and they didn't, whatever. But that's still not regrettable. You can't regret something that you would have needed a crystal ball to see the result of. You can't, if someone were to say, I regret hiring that person, what they're essentially saying is like, I regret having thought that it was a good idea to hire this person who seemed really qualified, who promised really good results. Well, that's a ridiculous thing to regret, because that's a good decision. That is a good decision. You just didn't know the outcome. You didn't have a crystal ball. And you can back people out. So did you fail at anything? Well, you failed at like seeing the future. You didn't fail at anything. There is no failure in that. Now, as a coach, if you can pique curiosity at that point, so if your client is sitting there going, you're right, because the thing is, they're not really going to be able to argue with it. They're going to have to accept and realize that like there wasn't failure there until they finally will either back into shame by saying, yeah, but I always do this. I'm terrible at assessing people or something. Okay, now we have an identity like a sentiment about the self, which is all in shame. Now we're going to work on that, right? Having nothing to do with the failure. Now we're all the way back to just a belief, right? The ability to deconstruct failure in somebody's life is so liberating and so empowering. And as coaches, it's so beautiful because you're reconstructing with a values alignment, with self-compassion, and with learning, right? Not guilt necessarily, but the learning you get from the guilt. Right? We have the tools to, be there to support somebody who may say, well, it is, the truth is I don't actually study, this area. I am a little bit lazy about it. And that's why I keep making misjudgments about the choices I make or whatever. Okay, fine. That may be something that is warranted to change your behavior around that, but we know how to take guilt and turn it into learnings, and then add it to self-compassion and light a fire. And not only, this isn't just a traditional like reframe on like, that wasn't the stuff we hear on the cartoons, like there is no failure, there's only trying, or whatever they say. I call that sort of messaging, which is so beautiful and important. But the messaging around like, there is no failure. Well, there is failure. And I think it's kind of a silly message to say that there isn't, But because we know that we can actually move through it this way, they'll loosen their grip with it, and it will actually, the felt experience for your client will start to become, I didn't actually fail because I don't regret anything that I would do. And you could do the exercise that I've mentioned a couple of times. If I get clients that are really stuck in this kind of sense of failing, the exercise that I've mentioned where I get people to do a redo. So you actually start from the time you opened your eyes in the morning. And I get my clients who think their life is all a disaster and they're terrible and they're stuck in shame and all that kind of stuff. And I'll say, okay, write the redo. So if you could do today again, what would you do different? And there's going to be things, right? They might say, well, I actually would have got up at my alarm. I wouldn't have pressed the snooze button a couple of times. Okay, cool. Fine. Good. Notice that. And then they'll get to like, well, I still would have drank my coffee. And, when that guy swore at me at the street, I still probably would have reacted the way I did, or they'll go through their day. And what's fascinating is I have never yet met a client who is surprised by the number of things they would change. I have clients only who are surprised at the number of things they actually wouldn't change. They're sitting there feeling like they're miserable, they're failures, they're unworthy and all this stuff. And yet when they actually go through the day step by step, given another chance, they're amazed at how much they would actually do the same. And that combined with all of this is such a powerful place to get to where we can almost dissolve it. So I just want to mention, so these 4 things, in order to fail, I believe that there are 3 essential pieces to it. First, you have to know what your objective is. So this seems really obvious, but it's not, right? Just knowing what your objective is sometimes very absent from people's sense of failure. Like, have you ever just sort of felt like a failure because you're not, I don't know, if you're like, I think social media is terrible for it. It's like you're scrolling through stuff and there's people that do things that you would never do in a million years. And for some reason, just because you see them doing these amazing things, you start to feel like a failure. You don't even know what your objective is. Like you don't even know what it is that you are trying to achieve, like the objective you want, and yet you end up sort of feeling like a failure. So part of it is actually you have to have an objective to actually truly have the experience of failing. You got to know what your objective is. The second thing is you have to believe you're capable of achieving it. So for me to feel like a failure because I'm not Tony Robbins or I'm not, some sort of like coaching guru, I would have to first believe that I am actually capable of that and that I have somehow failed to live up to what I'm capable of. This is an essential piece that often slips by people. They end up feeling like failures. They know their objective. They know they want to be A, B, or C. But they haven't actually really sat down to consider whether they really believe they're capable of doing it or whether they actually are capable of doing it, right? There's certain things like, I'd love to be one of those, like, they have millionaire, I don't know, whoever those people are who just have like money rolling in and all the things, they get to just like live their dreams. But there is certain things that they did to do that I'm incapable of doing, like spending 12 hours a day dedicated to my platform or whatever. I've got 3 kids. I'm not capable of doing that. Certainly not if I stay in alignment with my values. Right. So I think that's one of the areas where not in the frame of like, I might want to be a gymnast. I'm just not capable of it. There's certain practicalities around, like the question to your client, are you actually capable of it? But if you can go in deeper to that, like, actually, are you capable of it? Is a very important thing to ask. And it always surprises me at how often people haven't thought that one through. I really haven't thought it through. And then the third thing, I think often people will jump to like, and you have to try, but you first have to want it. So you've got to know what your objective is. You've got to believe you're capable of achieving it, right? Like it is impossible for me to fail in a race against Usain Bolt. I just can't fail. Like there is no, that isn't a thing. Like that is not a thing, right? You have to want the result. So this is, I think, above almost all else, this is the part that my clients would, that I'm finding that people are getting hung up on. So you may, I may look at somebody who's doing similar work to what I'm doing or whatever, and I know what my objective is. I want to have, this many clients, and I want to have this type of work coming my way, and I want to have these opportunities and possibilities available to me. Like these are the objectives of what I want. And I do believe I'm capable of it, right? Like, am I capable of achieving it? But the question of like, do I actually want it? Do I really genuinely want it? And this is where this concept of like the saboteur comes in. So there are certain things, and I don't mean to beat a dead horse here with my disdain for social media, but there is a sense of like what you think that you want is often something that if you were given the opportunity to have it, you would realize you don't actually want it. Things like, do I want to be, I'm going to go back here. So, do you want to be so successful that you are, you have a waiting list of 3 months for clients and you have, whatever the case is? Well, the truth of, do you actually want that is very, very difficult to figure out because there's so many things that you don't know, like so many unknowns in terms of what it is that you're actually striving for. And so very often the parts of you that are stopping you from getting what you think that you want is actually the part of you that is staying in alignment with your values, going against the part of you that hasn't sorted out that what you think you want is actually out of your alignment. Like it's just not something that you actually value. You don't really want to be that successful because you want to be able to sit down and read a book sometimes, because you want to be able to give yourself a break. You want to be able, I don't know, there's a million different reasons why you might not actually want the things that you want. And this is, covered a little bit in our questions around like, what will you lose when you get what you want? And we often notice that people don't know how to answer that question. People, when they get really, really consumed with what they want, they don't pay attention to what they're going to lose. And you can't get something without losing something. There are always these things that you're going to lose. And I think very, very often, so little things like, my little example of like, you didn't win the race today because you chose to go to the party last night. Can you really even have failed at like not going to bed early? Is that really what you wanted? Like, yes, there's that bigger goal of like, I want to be the one that won the race, but you didn't want to go to bed last night. And that's what it takes to get this. And so you didn't actually, in terms of failure, if you didn't really want it, you can't have failed at it, right? You have to actually have wanted the things that you're after. So this is it's a very nuanced kind of weird place. You have to stay very steady as a coach to stay clear on trying to guide your client to like, do you really want this? Because if you are busy feeling like a failure about something that you know the objective of, that you believe you're capable of, but the truth is you don't really want it, not the way you think that you want it, it would be a very good skill to have as a coach to be able to course correct that, right? Get them more aligned. And this is where I'm leading to. And the fourth one, of course, is that you have to try, right? So you've got to know what your objective is. You got to believe you're capable of achieving it. You have to actually want it, for real want it, and then you have to try. And if you do those 4 things and you don't succeed, then you failed. It is what it is. I mean, that is absolutely what it is. You failed then. But remember that when you fail, when it is an actual for real fail, meaning you feel a sense of regret, which will encompass some variation on disappointment or guilt or whatever that is, combined with self-compassion, then you're going to be able to take that moment of failure and say, okay, I did everything that I thought that I wanted and everything that I thought that I could, and it didn't work. And so if I still want this, I'm going to have to get creative, right? I'm going to have to work harder. I'm going to have to approach it a different way. I'm going to have, like, whatever it is, you've lit that fire, and you don't go anywhere near shame when you're doing this right. And if you can help your client sort of like embody that as a strategy, and not let them just keep accidentally falling into this shame failure shit that people keep just like blindly kind of falling into, because it's the easiest way to frame things. It's like it's the laziest way to just be like, oh, I don't have what I want, I'm a failure. Well, no, you gotta just take a moment. And as a coach, I think it's one of the most empowering things that we can do. So in terms of values here, so the question of, do they really, really want it? So do they actually really want what they believe that they want? Hang on, sorry, I just realized I'm still weirdly sharing something. Okay. Yeah, so in the case of my pretend client who didn't win the race, that question of like, in order to win these races, you're gonna have to skip all the parties. It's really, really like it's not a given that the future self always has to override the present self. Right? I think we talked about this. We touched on it a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about something else, can't remember. But indulging in our present self, like in the pleasures of the self now, is a very admirable and honorable and respectable thing to do. It was when I was talking about planning and preparation, how we all kind of like bow at the, crown or whatever of like over planning and preparing and everything. And we're always considering the future self is the thing that we should be really prioritizing. And the only time we seem to, talk about like getting present and everything is in experience. So we all are very familiar with this sort of Eckhart Tolle, this like sentiment of like, I want to be more present in my life. I think that's a very familiar thing that, that is talked about all the time, but we don't pay a whole lot of attention to like, where do our values fit into that? So take it out of this sort of like beingness of just being present in the moment, but like, what is it that we actually value in the present moment that we sometimes feel shame about because we're told that we're supposed to prioritize the future moment, the not failing in the future. And so we do things like, the person who stays at work because they don't want to fail on like the project or whatever, but they do that at the cost of failing in their relationship because they don't show up in their relationship. And somehow this sort of future endeavoring toward the success of the future is taking priority over the success of the moment, the not failing in the moment. And so in terms of our values, one of the things that we do really, really, really well with NLP, I think, NLP does it better than just about any other approach out there, is to actually be able to elicit and to deconstruct and then reconstruct our relationship with our values. And I would say, I know that Brene Brown has this great definition that I will read to you because I wrote it down. We feel guilty when we hold up something we've done or failed to do against our values and find that they don't match up. It's psychologically uncomfortable, this feeling, but one that's helpful. The discomfort of cognitive dissonance is what drives meaningful change. Shame, however, corrodes the very part of us that believes we can change and do better. So most of you are familiar with this very distinct difference between shame and guilt. And so this values alignment is where we have to really, really pay attention to, is your client actually doing so, or you yourself, Are you actually out of alignment with your values? Or is there something stacked in this success failure duality that you're working with that is corrupting your ability to recognize that you're actually living your values? You're not failing, you're just living your values. So we know too that there is not a high correlation between highly successful people and highly happy people. So this is where success comes in with like, I think we just need, some, I don't know, awareness, mindfulness, something around this idea of success. So success is so external, right? There is no way to kind of like, as soon as you go internal, this intrinsic sort of like motivation to be you, to be even more you, to be more congruent, more aligned, failure and success just kind of becomes obsolete, right? It's not, you don't, you wouldn't use that language with yourself. You wouldn't have a moment when you're like in this perfect connection with someone that you care deeply about and you've offered empathy and you've, whatever. It's unlike, you may later in conversation describe it as like successful, but it diminishes it, doesn't it? Like if you were to be like, well, that was a successful connection we just had, it would diminish it somehow. It would take some of the trueness out of it, right? Like it would take the authenticity out of it. There's very little that is authentic about success in the way that most people use the word. And so I think that this idea that success is going to provide something that is, better than failure, if you can instead get a person really looking at their own values and saying, okay, first of all, what are your values? Right. So for anyone here who isn't trained in NLP, just we have a very, very straightforward way of staying with a client, just keeping them very like laser focused on what motivates you. So the questions around what are your values is, say I've got somebody who's really working or wrestling with failure and feelings of failure and all that shame shit that corrodes everything. And if I say to them, okay, forget about that for a minute, just what makes you feel most full? What makes you feel most real? What motivates you? Think about a moment in your life when you were most motivated. What was going on? What were you doing? What were you feeling? What were you thinking? What were you experiencing? And this is how we draw out people's real values, right? So they'll say something like, when I'm walking through the forest and I'm listening to the birds and I just go into this like timeless place where I'm just connected to nature and earth. And in those moments, I'm so good, like no matter what's going on in the world. It's safe to say that is probably a very high value, that like nature and the connection with nature is probably a very high value for this person. And it is quite possible that some of the failure they've experienced in life, like the failure that they've allowed themselves to think is true, has actually been because, and I just realized how much I'm talking about myself here, that they find themselves off in the woods when they should maybe be doing something else, right? So is this failure, right? Like when you go to the forest and you go to and yet you've set up a life for yourself where like you're supposed to be, achieving A, B, and C, but you're off in the forest. And because of that, when you come back and then all these constructs of success and failure, it would be far more suitable for that person to be able to figure out how they might realign their life with their values in a way that they can, if they want to keep the duality of success and failure, so that they can feel more successful, so that the behaviors and the choices that they're making are actually more commonly lining up with what they value. I think people who have very clear values, people who can say to you, who can list their values and demonstrate that they actually live by their values, I do not think those people get very caught up in the failures of life. I don't think those are the same people who sit around feeling like they have failed. I'm quite open to being corrected there. This is just my own thinking, but I think I'm right. I think that I'm right here. I think that people that just know their values, I'm thinking of like my grandparents, who just like, my grandmother knew her values, man. She was like, fierce, like so many of these beautiful women of like that time of just like, she was so committed to what she had created and what she had nurtured and her animals and her farm and her kids and her grandkids and her thing. Like she just, failure and success, and they went through all the hardships, right? They had times when they had money and times when they didn't, and I'm sure she had to deal with a million different things. But i I know that there would have, when I read her journals and when I, all of that stuff, it was just being like, it was, you would meet hardships and you'd deal with hardships, but she lived her values, so she wasn't regretful, right? And I think when we can ask our clients the question, when they say, how we all have clients who get so caught up and in the, am I making the right decision? Am I making the right decision? And I spent, oh, Tanya, I'll see you, I'll come to you in a sec. That whole, am I making the right decision, gets all twisted with like, okay, wait a second. You can't control the outcome, right? So no matter what decision you make in life, in any situation ever, you actually don't have control over the future, like over how people are going to react, the consequence of that action. You can predict it, in certain circumstances, you can have a better or worse prediction of what might happen or whatever, but you can't actually control it. So the only way in this situation to decide whether or not you should make decision A, B, or C is, when you go to bed tonight, knowing in this moment that you cannot predict the outcome of A, B, or C, which of those decisions will you not regret, even if it doesn't give you the consequence, the outcome that you want, right? And people answer that. Like my clients can answer that question with like, well, if I do this and the consequence is this, I'm going to regret having done it. But if I do this, and even if the consequence is this, I still stayed true to who I am and what I believe. Now you're setting somebody up resistant to failure, or to bad failure anyway. Tanya.
Oh, hi there. I didn't realize I put my hand up, but I wanted
Oh,
to for later. I was just trying to figure out where it was on my phone. But based on the criteria, I've definitely filled that today. That aside, what if the thing that you really want is, you want it because it's a thing, it's a means to an end to the thing that you actually want?
right. So long as it's intrinsic motivation, right? So long as the motivation is intrinsic to who you are and your values, I would say that like you still want to win the race, right? Like being in perfect alignment with yourself is is not going to take anything away from ambition or drive or desire to be the best. Actually, like in some, competition generally sort of sucks, but there's also certain, like it wouldn't be very fun to watch like a participation baseball league or whatever, right? Like, or for athletes that's super, or all of the musicians, I don't know, like all the things, there is a place for competition. I get it. Not in my house, but no, I'm joking. There is a place for competition, but in terms of motivation, you're not going to be any less motivated. You're still going to want to accomplish all those things, but what you're not going to do is feel like a personal failure if you can figure out how to stay fully aligned with your values as you pursue whatever it is that you're endeavoring to achieve. Right. So if you kind of look at like, I still want to win the race, I still want to make this many dollars, or I want to have this much impact, or whatever the thing is, where the like the that motivation edge, extrinsic motivation means that you're going to experience a sense of failure or success based on what happens external to you. So you know the difference between like competitors, those beautiful moments, and I don't know why I'm so sports tonight. I guess it's just because it's so connected to the win failure thing. But when you see competitors who like cheer each other on, even though they're competing like head to head, And you see the ones that have this exceptional spirit of like this, just this sense of like, they are genuinely happy for the person who beat them because they got a personal best. Like there's just like, there's something going on there in contrast to the person who maybe didn't run their best that night because they went to that party last night, but they didn't run their best today. And they want to win. They're like secretly hoping everybody else has a shittier day than they did. They want their win to come from that. Do you know what I mean? Like they want their success, and they're going to call it success based on how everybody else did in contrast to themselves, as opposed to the person who has like intrinsically they're competing with themselves, right? What they want to do. And there is something really powerful about competing with yourself in terms of like, I want to prove to myself that I have the ability and I have the, blah, 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 to be able to continue to get better inch by inch every day. And so if I did better in this race than I did the last race, and I know that I'm competing against somebody who is also trying to beat their personal best based on their hard work, and right now their personal best is going to get them, something that I can't yet achieve, that you'd actually see them you'd see their intrinsic motivation in their own success, being able to also share it with others. So I don't think that it doesn't interfere with your own desire to get everything, like to get everything that you're capable of getting. It just means that you're not going to label yourself with the failure and success labels that are external and therefore shame inducing. Right? So I don't know, Tanya, if that answers what you're talking about, but I don't know. Does that answer?
Maybe. It's like if somebody wants a full roster of clients because they want the benefits of that, financially or whatever other measure that they're wanting. Like, does that saboteur come in if it's like not real?
I don't know. Give me an argument in how feeling like a failure would be suitable or
So does it fail the criteria of I didn't mean to make a pun there, but so does it fail the criteria of actually not being what you want? Because then the means are irrelevant.
Yeah, because if you're not getting the client, like I could go ahead if I wanted to become the coach who uses NLP to, I don't know, like get girls at a bar, like how to use hypnotic language to seduce. There's probably a big market for that, right? I could probably charge a lot for that. It'd be easy. It'd be easy work that I could be pretty successful at, just teaching people to how, get into rapport, blah, 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 blah. And then you get in their pants and blah, blah, blah. Like, but it would horrify me. It would be so out of alignment. It's obviously not what I really want. And I'm being drastically extreme, obviously. But I think that like, yeah, I would explore the like, what do you actually want? So do you want just a full roster of clients? But what you're actually saying is that you want these types of clients. And if you go through the question of like, okay, that's your objective, is to have this many clients because you want to be able to make a living as a coach and you want to be able to still enjoy your life and blah, 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 all this stuff. Do you believe you're capable of achieving it? I don't know. I would stay there for a minute. What's involved in actually getting a full roster of clients? I can tell you from like nearly a decade of coaching, and that's hard work. That is like hard work. It's not something, there's a million different ways. And I'm sure there'd be people that would argue with me and be like, no, it's super easy. If you're a great coach, it's like super easy. You just have clients all the time. But I wouldn't believe them. Because you've got to be exceptionally good at what you're doing to be able to maintain it, right? So you've either got to be like so good at your craft, so good at what you do in all the ways that you just like continually get referrals, right? So you never have to do any of the hard work of like marketing or doing all of the other stuff because you're just a referral based thing because you're so good. You also have to have like you have to live. I mean, we have the internet now, so I don't know, but like they used to say to us when we were trained, 9 years ago when I did my training, they would say, if you live in a city that has less than 300,000 people in it, you're going to struggle. There's just not enough people. And that was, coaching has become much more popular since then. But it was like, there's just the numbers don't work. The math formula does not work. So you're either, you've either got to move or you've got to, and everything changed since the pandemic and Zoom, and now we're all online, which I doubt makes it any easier. I doubt that now there's 56 million coaches available online, that has made it easier to be successful. I don't know. But yeah, so this, like, are you capable of achieving it question needs to be probably really explored. But say you come to yes, say you come to like, yeah, absolutely, yes, I'm capable of achieving this. Now you've got to get to the, do you really want it? So what is it that you actually want? So your objective is to get the roster of clients, but do you really want everything else that goes along with it? So do you want to be posting every day? Do you want to be, engaging with your clients at all times? Do you want to be offering this and offering that? And do you like all of those things? And usually when I start doing this with my clients, going through the like, okay, let's look at every aspect of what you, what's involved. Do you want all these things? And there will be a big handful of them that they don't actually want. So it's very helpful to then make it, so then we go into values, right? So what is it that you actually do want that is in line with your values, and how do we need to backtrack now to what you're capable of achieving and what your objective is? And so just like maneuvering that sort of back and forth before you get to the fourth, before you get to like, okay, now go try it. And then even when you get to now go try it, you're still experimenting. And again, you can be unsuccessful. I don't know what a better word is for it. You can not make the money, right, without failing. Right? Like if you do all the, you say you get it, so you're like, yes, absolutely, those things I have, I do want all those things, I know what I want, blah blah blah, and then you go try it and it doesn't work. Where in that was there a failure? Because if you were to rewind that and do it again, in absence of a crystal ball, you can't know what you don't know. And so you have to try this stuff, you have to try the things, right? And so if you start to feel like a failure, you're going to give up. And there's a lot of practicalities, and I know that there are. You can't just sit there and like try forever. You can't be one of those romantic movies where like you just try and try and try as like your family, dies of starvation because you can't pay the bills. Like there's going to be things that interfere, but by and large, if you have the capacity to stay away from this failure success thing, and instead you keep yourself in this place of like, okay, if there's a regret, I need to learn from it, right? If I know for sure that the reason I'm not getting what I have set out to get is because the truth is I haven't, like, I mean, you guys are coaches, the clients that I work with who say to me like, I really, really want to stop drinking pop, but I just can't. And of course, I very quickly go, okay, let's flip that, because that's the first lie you're believing. Because the truth is the very opposite of that. You absolutely can not drink the pop, because pretty sure you're in charge of your own arms and your own mouth. You can just simply not pick up the pop can. That would do it right there. There's your solution. It's all over. You absolutely can not drink the pop. The trouble is you don't want to. You don't want to give it up. That's why you're drinking the pop. So stop the bullshit of like, I really want to, I just can't. And say to yourself the truth, which is, I really can, I don't want to. Start there, right? Now let's talk about the things that interfere with success and failure when it comes to that kind of thing, right? So if there is, do they know what their objective is? Sure. Do they believe they're capable of achieving of it? I don't know. You may need to just stop right there. You can't be a failure if you actually don't even believe you're capable of it. you first need to establish the fact that you're capable of doing something. Then you've got to actually want it, like for real want it, then you've got to try and do it. So I think in terms of like um how you like how to bring this into a very applicable frame is that we know people fall into patterns of speech that are just colloquial, right? We say things because we have a limited amount of language to express this very complex experience that we're having as human beings, and we have to go to the things that are going to give us the language to communicate it, basically. But unfortunately, as neurolinguistic programmer practitioners here, we know that our language is so powerful in terms of the blueprint of our thoughts, right? They are really, really what is actually causing us to believe what we believe. So being able to change that language around failure into something else is going to have the effect that we want it to have, essentially. Okay, it's 8:30 and I am going to end this. The last thing I want to say, I just want to say something that I found really fascinating. There's actually so many other things here. I feel like I should let you guys all go and I'll just keep talking to myself for the next hour, and then I'll let you guys watch the recording in your own time. The emotions that go along with perception of failure tend to be shame, as we've talked lots about, guilt, of course, which is not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing that can be used in combination with self-compassion as a very strong thing. Humiliation, which is, by Brene Brown's definition, you might remember that her definition of humiliation is when we have been wronged and we don't think it's we're deserving of it. So shame is when somebody calls us out and we feel like we're deserving of it, right? So I feel shame when somebody says, Tara, that was so irresponsible of you. And I actually feel like, God, I know. God, I'm such an irresponsible person. I'm so right. Now I go down the shame road. I feel humiliated if somebody says to me, you know, my boss says to me, Tara, you're so irresponsible. And I feel like, what? You, like, if I have a sense of like, that is not warranted. Just because I did this one thing does not mean that I am irresponsible, and it doesn't warrant that kind of, you know, being called out in front of these. That is humiliation. It's that like, not deserved. And it causes rage and, you know, all that kind of stuff. That goes along with failure. Feelings of failure often will be accompanied by feelings of humiliation. In which case, guys, you clear it. You clear humiliation. Embarrassment, which is like little failures, right? When you're like, watch me do a push-up, and then you like trip and fall. Embarrassment is the stuff where like you kind of know it's lighter. You know that everybody has experienced what you're experiencing. It's still embarrassing, but it's not going to you know, go in deep. Fear, obviously. Perfectionism. Now, perfectionism is what I found so fascinating. So I think it's very easy for us to all, you know, the relationship between expectations and failure and perfectionism and all this kind of stuff is pretty evident, self-evident. But I have this very interesting relationship with perfectionism, which I may have mentioned here before, but it's worth repeating because our failures are, perfectionism has a reputation of being associated with like a type A personality, right? Like perfectionism of like crossing your T's and dotting your I's and having things in perfect order. And there's this definite association we have with like that type of perfectionism. But perfectionism, think about it, is something that we all hold in different areas of our life, right? So I am literally a walking catastrophe most of the time. Like nobody in their right mind would ever accuse me of being a perfectionist. In fact, quite the opposite. They would be like, Tara, you should probably, you know. However, so failure. So when I was doing all of this work and I'm listening to all this stuff around like how this all sort of fits together, thinking that like I'm the last person in the world who has this perfectionism. And yet the truth is I am an absolute perfectionist when it comes to the things where I hold the highest integrity. So I am an absolute perfectionist when it comes to compassion, when it comes to connection, when it comes to coaching, like being able to problem solve, like solve other people's problems, not my own necessarily, but other people's. Um, in terms of my own impression to the world, like I get devastated still. I walk, talk, breathe, I do all the things in the world. This is my understanding couldn't be deeper in terms of all of this stuff. It's still something I work through all the time if somebody doesn't like me. Like the idea of just somebody being like, yeah, I don't really like her very much. It's like, what? Shatters me still. And that type of perfectionism is like, what in the world why do I have some sort of like weird God complex that I can be this like fixer and friend to everyone and, connected always with all the people and like all that stuff, right? It is the very definition of perfectionism. It's just not about my pens and my papers and my, work that I put out in the world. And I would say that I think everyone probably has an area in their life where they are a perfectionist. I would bet everyone. And we don't, I love it actually when you find like somebody. I right now my fronts, I live in a condo and they're redoing like the stairs and everything outside my like front porch sort of area. So there's these guys every day who are building this stuff, and I listen to them and they're all potty mouthed and they're like, I don't know, this is construction guys. they talk about, I don't know, all these sort of stereotypes. And yet I walk out there and I listen to this one guy working with these younger guys, putting the grooves together for like the wooden things or whatever. And it was like, it's so interesting to notice how everything changes. So he goes from this guy who's, joking about the weekend and being at the, whatever. And then he gets into this, like where he clearly has all this integrity, right? Where like his area of what I would say like perfectionism and everything is, and everything changes. And I think it's such a beautiful sort of thing that maybe we need to take a look at where is the perfectionism in your life supporting you, because I think none of us would want to let go of those areas where we have the most pride, right? Where we have the most, where we hold ourselves to the highest standards. But because of that, we're going to have the negative, the flip side of that, which is we're going to be way more susceptible and vulnerable to feeling like a failure in those areas, right? So it's a really interesting thing to, I think, just explore a little with your clients in terms of like it's funny to me that some people can do things miserably and they don't feel like a failure because they didn't really hold themselves to any standard of being able to do it well, right? And so it's you recognize just the subjectivity to it and the falseness of it. Failure has nothing to do with anything except our own construction of believing false beliefs about ourselves and others and making stuff up. So, in terms of profit, the very last thing, I will literally just take 1 minute here. I think that it is so important. All of this is so important to say that like if you are still here and you are still a coach or a counselor or whoever you are, like a practitioner of any type, if you are in any way in the business of helping other people and you struggle with this feeling of failing in your own life sometimes and question whether or not you're imposter or whether you're worthy or deserving of being where you're being, if you can stay really aligned with like, wait a minute, how much of this supposed failure are actual regrets and how am I handling those regrets? And you can probably dissolve half of the failure that you feel, most of it, even more. And whatever you're left with, whatever the actual regrets are, now that you've cleared out the mess and the noise of all this like false failure, isolate those things that you do regret So if you really, really do regret not waking up at 5:30 because it would really make your life better if you did and didn't sleep until 8 o'clock in the morning, figure out, just stay with that. Forget about the fact that you're not getting all the clients that you want. That's later. That has nothing to do with you being a failure. Correct the little things that are actual regrets, regrettable things that if you wrote the redo of today, you would actually change those things. If you could concentrate all of your effort on just those things, your now I'm going to use the word success, but your chances, you're increasing your odds of being happier. And the cool part, like everything else, is that the success then will become so less important to you at the end of the day. If you start living in alignment with your values to the point where you don't have any regrets, you are not calling yourself a failure, you're not feeling like a failure, and you may or may not, all of a sudden it's like, well, I wanted to make 6,000 a month, I'm making 4,000 a month, but I'm 2,500 times happier. And I don't feel like a failure at all. I feel like I'm doing great stuff. And we go on one less trip a year or whatever the thing is, right? Like whatever it is. Who in the world is more qualified to charge money for coaching than you? I think we've really got to go there. I think that is where, if you can always, and it's just a basic reframe, but it's a very, very good one to keep top of mind, I think, for all of us with this, anytime, because I would bet that every one of you has had that feeling of how can I be here doing this when I just did that, whatever that thing is. But having tools to dissolve that thing into what it really is going to make you the best coach. And you'll win and succeed and not fail. Joking. Cool. All right. Now questions. Yes. Sally.
My turn. Okay. I have been so successful tonight by not interrupting you. I'm so proud of myself.
I'm also proud of you.
I've had so many questions and so many comments. I tell you what, and a lot of it I think I've learned from PACE, because the values piece,
yes,
of learning the importance of values, not just with my personal life, but in working with clients and hearing how clients don't believe in themselves. Well, what do you believe in? Let's start there. What do you believe in? Well, I believe that if I want to have the things that I want, then I'm going to have a better job. Okay, well, what are you willing to do to get a better job? I mean, it just all keeps boiling down to values. And I know I learned that through PACE.
Yeah.
But when it comes to winning is what people do. It's not who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, and I may have made a comment to you about that, in terms of you have to learn to be content with your discontent.
Right.
Because if you can learn to be content with your discontent, then you're going to know better where you want to be and where you don't want to be.
Yeah.
And then you can learn how to, well, or even just to ask yourself, okay, how can this failure serve me?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And again, with the even try and take the word away, right? How this experience that I just had that I previously would have called failure, what in the world actually just happened? And how do I learn from it? How do I learn either that it's giving me so much wisdom about what I actually want that I didn't know I wanted, like going to the party. Maybe going to the party at this point in your life is actually way more important for what is really most important to you than winning, right? What if you allowed yourself to imagine that, open to the possibilities of what would your life be like if, right? And so being able to, it's beautiful, Sally. Oh, you're muted again. You're muted.
Even the perfectionism piece, when I have a client that says, well, it just doesn't work because I'm such a perfectionist. Okay, well, what does that mean? You're a perfectionist.
Yeah.
Do you show up on time for everything? No, I just can't seem to do that. Because you're such a perfectionist, you're afraid you can't show up on time, so you prove that you can't, so you don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think most procrastinators are perfectionists. I know that's a broad term, but I just really do.
No, I agree. I agree. I think they fit tightly together. And I think everyone kind of is in varying degrees, right? And I think you're right. Like I think there's a very strong relationship between all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else got anything about that specifically around failure and success and all of the value stuff? Or if not, then I'll shut the recording off. And if anyone has sort of client stuff they want to talk about, I'll do that. Okay, and shut it off.